Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 came out just the other week, and I would be wrong to say it wasn't honestly really good and surprisingly scary for what I've come to expect from mob games. The first 2 chapters were what brought a major consensus online that indie horror, and especially Mascot horror, was losing its power and becoming more focused on making money and sales like most AAA games nowadays. And with Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach coming out within the same span of time between Poppy Playtime's first 2 chapters, people thought that Mascot horror was appealing to kids more and losing its special spark that originated with the first few Mascot horror games like FNAF, Bendy, and the original Hello Neighbor. Of course, Mascot horror will always be drawn more towards kids, it's just how it always has been and always will be, but in the last few years, and especially 2023 and 2024 so far, these major Mascot horror franchises like Five Nights at Freddy's and Poppy Playtime have been making some pretty hard 180s on the road to genuine horror. If you have played or seen the newest chapter of Poppy Playtime and you've seen the ending with Catnap, the creature that you fight, known as Catnap, is extremely disturbing and not what you would normally expect from a franchise that has a roster of characters like Huggy Wuggy and Mommy Longlegs. Like, even the names of the characters aren't even close to being horrifying. But Mob Games saw the criticism and realized that they needed to take a change of pace with their style and lean heavier into the pure horror of their story to maintain a good reputation up there with Five Nights at Freddy's. And I think that Steel Wool realized this as well after the critiques of Security Breach. Besides all the game-breaking bugs that came with the game's launch, basically everyone realized that what originally made FNAF what it is today was the extremely scary and innovative horror aspects. And now there is basically none of that in this new title, except for a few sections which are arguably some of the best sections out of the whole game. So what did Steel Wool do with this newfound criticism? Well, they made one of the best modern FNAF games we've seen, aka Ruin. Ruin took all the best and scary parts of the base game and implemented them into every section of this DLC. Ruin was basically the opposite of Security Breach, where it was harder to find a joyous section of the game than the main focus of horror. And guess what the response was? Absolute trash. People thought the DLC was not worth the price tag. I'm kidding. The game was obviously adored by both old and new fans and complimented for it being genuinely scary. Not only was it complimented for its horror, but there was also genuinely very few bugs upon launch. Somehow MatPat managed to skip one of the most important lore-heavy chapters, and I have no clue how he managed to do it.
Ooh, hey. Whoa!
We are not where we were.
This definitely feels like we've skipped something.
I think we broke the game.
I think I broke the game for like the 3rd time.
Okay, maybe not all the glitches are gone, and just so happened to be on my first playthrough, I managed to skip an entire chapter that was filled with the most lore, but hey, consider that my contribution to the speedrunning community.
That was basically the biggest bug that an average player would be able to find without looking around for secrets and accidentally falling out of the map. Although, no, that's different. That's just because the maps are on top of each other and you would sometimes fall through the roof of the map instead of being teleported onto the ground like normal. But in all seriousness, Ruin for a lot of people was able to restore their faith in the future of modern FNAF games. But while Ruin restored people's faith in the future of the games, Ruin didn't give us much information. I mean, don't get me wrong, the game is absolutely filled to the brim, stacked with lore and many story chunks. But with a bunch of puzzle pieces, you can maybe put a few bits together, but not really knowing what the full picture is and not having all the pieces that you need, you can't really tell what it is that you're putting together. So people who have solved small sections of the lore don't even know if what they've solved is definitely correct, because years later the Freddy spaghetti on the wall that is Security Breach's lore is still falling, and we aren't able yet to tell what sticks. God, I just used like 2 metaphors in a minute. I'm super cool. Anyways, while Ruin restored faith in the games, the fans of the lore had been grasping at straws for years. But with Help 1 and 2, Steel Wool really restored basically all the faith in the Mascot horror community. I'm not gonna go into a crazy amount of detail because I'm not MatPat and this isn't even a FNAF-focused video. But the newest FNAF VR game has given the answers to the biggest lingering questions over the last few years that FNAF fans needed to stay motivated to keep hunting. Any answers about the lore in a FNAF game is a super rare occurrence, so this game telling us as much as it did was honestly really great timing. Poppy Playtime has actually almost managed to do the same thing with Chapter 3. After 1.5 years since Chapter 2 was released, to great reviews from fans and mediocre reviews from non-Mascot horror fans, Mob Games, like Steel Wool, needed to prove themselves that they aren't just another cash grab type of development studio like some of the up-and-coming Mascot horror-based franchises. Chapter 2 is criticized for the very direct build of the chapter and how the gameplay itself wasn't very horror-inducing, which I understand is pretty hard to implement into a game that's monsters are based around toys for children, but a lot of people who played or watched playthroughs of both the first chapters were able to see that Mob Games were definitely able to make a toy creature that was genuinely terrifying. But with the release of the analog horror tapes and Project Playtime and the 2 ARGs that came out in the build-up to Chapter 3, people were definitely getting hyped for this new release, and tension was rising as we kept getting more and more teasers with videos and the announcement of the smiling critters and eventually our first few trailers for Chapter 3. These trailers finally gave us a real peek into what was going on the past year of development that this game has been in. And let's just say that these teases got the fanbase super excited for what was to come. The new turn that the lore and the gameplay took was pretty unexpected, but very welcome. And then the game was delayed until the end of January. But then it released, and everyone was hopping on, including me, to see what we've been waiting for. And without major spoilers, this game absolutely blew my mind and was super well received by both die-hard fans of the games and new players. Like Ruin, Chapter 3 managed to be Mob Games' first launch day without major game-breaking bugs, and they had a very successful launch. Of course, I'm not a huge lore-based creator, so I haven't found all of the secrets and lore within the chapter, so we'll have to wait until creators like MatPat and other theorists inform us on all the top things that we all missed, and where the story will be presumably going from here. And with Poppy Playtime and FNAF both having their big releases the past year, we already have news on the next FNAF game. And it seems to be following the same path of leaning deeper into the horror. FNAF Into the Pit is what is seemingly going to be the next release for the FNAF franchise until further notice from Steel Wool. If you didn't know, Into the Pit was the first story in the Fazbear Frights book series. It's about a boy named Oswald who goes into an abandoned ball pit in a pizzeria named Jeff's Pizza, and he somehow time travels back to 1985, and long story short, Springtrap lures Oswald to the back of the then Freddy Fazbear's pizza place to witness the first actual missing children's incident. Scott Cawthon told us that these books were going to be made to help clear up the more lucratively hidden lore points, and to help tie up loose ends. This first story obviously showed us the date of the missing children's incident, and based off the leaked trailer of the game, it looks absolutely incredible and extremely different from literally everything we've seen in this franchise. The new, more 8-bit style is very smooth and, in my opinion, gives Springtrap his best look that he's had across all the games that he's been a part of. It's incredibly smooth animation and once again, genuinely quite terrifying. This is just furthering my point of the future of Mascot horror being very bright. But FNAF and Poppy aren't the only Mascot horror games. Bendy has been having an honestly decently sized comeback after running its main course with the 5 chapters to the original game. With the Dark Revival being well received, Bendy the Cage being announced a few months back and coming out later this year, and the Bendy movie, yes, the Bendy movie being announced back on Christmas Day, Bendy has been following this path of leaning farther into the horror aspects of their franchise, instead of mainly appealing to a child-based audience. Hello, Garten of Banban. It's still, you know, Garten of Banban, so it's not the scariest possible game, but if you've been keeping up with the newer releases, you would see that there's been an honest improvement over the past year and a half or so that these 6 games have been developed. It's still obviously very focused on appealing to kids and giving older Mascot horror fans and YouTubers little bits to laugh at, like including Choo Choo Charles.
Yeah, roughly about there, yeah.
Help me!
What? Because of course. No!
But even if you are a diehard hater of the Banban games, you can't lie that there has definitely been a noticeable improvement before whatever the first game was and the latest release. I'm in no way a fan of Garten of Banban, but I can respect it, and I think that the developers are trying their best to make a good game. At least to me, it feels pretty obvious that the Mascot horror scene was in a pretty bad downward spiral in 2021 and 22. But it definitely seems like we are starting to move on from that slump in the genre of glitchy, not scary, confusing story horror games that we've almost come to expect over the past few years. We are genuinely starting to see quite the incredible improvement when it comes to our favorite franchises and the latest games that they've been putting out. The child's horror is not going to stop anytime soon. There will always be a ginormous market for that type of game. But the future is looking very bright for Mascot horror. By openly sharing with these game developers that we need to see a change in the low amount of horror in recent years, they actually listened to us and delivered with immensely more creepy and better polished games. I'm not saying that we need to be super vocal about every little detail about games and that developers will always listen to us when we ask for improvements, no matter if it's small patches or big plot points and overall gaming experience stuff, but these game studios do actually listen to us, even if it doesn't ever seem to be that way. But with FNAF's 10-year anniversary being this year and the Into the Pit FNAF game coming out around the same time or maybe on the day of the anniversary, it's going to be a great next few years when it comes to horror and the gaming scene.
Oh. So the door doesn't door?